All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Meat of the Sandwich, the Middle Manager's Guide to Upward and Downward Communication. I'm Patrick Hill, and I'm going to be your host for this web seminar. I hope everybody can hear me, and we'll get going here. If at any point during the course of this you have any questions, I think I might be able to see some of the questions on group chat, but otherwise what I'd like you to do is to write them down. And at the end of the seminar, I'm going to post a couple of links for questions, contact links for me, my email address, Facebook, Twitter accounts. Also, this web seminar is going to be posted onto YouTube, so you can add your comments and questions to the YouTube link as well. So let's get started. Let's see here. Just share the screen with you. Hopefully you can all see it. Now, the reason why I chose middle managers is that leadership literature and popular leadership literature, as well as research, tends to focus on leadership from a top-down perspective. In other words, that you are the one in charge and you are communicating your mission and vision to the people below you. What a lot of it fails to realize is the fact that most of us have a boss. We're not all the CEO, president of an organization. So middle managers have the dual role of being both a leader and a follower. And we're going to take a look at that throughout the course of this web seminar. A little bit about me. I've been in the military for a little over 20 years. I've been a Navy musician, which is a little bit of a unicorn in the military world. There aren't very many military musicians. In addition to that, I'm an officer, so that makes me a bit more of a unicorn. I've been a unit leader, a conductor, and an instructor. And my current position is a training officer at the Naval School of Music, where I supervise about 30 instructors. I'm in charge of student management and curriculum development and delivery. I have a bachelor's degree, a Bachelor of Science in Music from Illinois State University, a Master of Arts in Public Policy and International Affairs from Liberty University. And I'm currently pursuing a doctorate of strategic leadership from Regent University, which is the reason for this seminar is a requirement for a class that I'm taking in leadership communication. So today we're going to talk about what our objectives are. We're going to define leadership and followership, and we're going to take a look at the characteristics of each. And I think what you're going to find is that the characteristics of leadership and the characteristics of followership are very similar. We're also going to talk about communication. We're going to put a definition and clearly articulate something that we all know what it is, but sometimes we just don't know quite how to say it. So we're going to articulate that. We're going to find ways to apply communication to our day-to-day activities at work and even in our relationships. And then finally, we're going to talk about tools for having difficult conversations, especially as middle managers. We often have to have difficult conversations, not just with the people under our authority, but sometimes we've got to have difficult conversations with our leaders. So we're going to have some practical tools that you can take with you away from this web seminar and immediately apply to your day-to-day dealings. So let's get started. Leadership. Before I put the definition of leadership up there, take a minute and think about what you think leadership is. Think about how you would define leadership in your own words. As a position where people do what you're told or what they're told? Do you think of it in terms of a coach of a team where everybody looks to that person for guidance? So just think about that for a second. Up. All right, so this is not there. Depending on the text and you go to, and even what point in history of leadership research, the definition is going to change a little bit. But the most recent definition we have is by Peter Northouse in his book Leadership in Theory and Practice, the seventh edition. Is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. Now, there are a couple of things that are missing from this definition. The first thing that's missing is a position. And notice that it doesn't say anything about a leadership position or a title. It talks about influence. So it doesn't necessarily matter where you are in the hierarchy of your organization if you have influence. And the other thing that's missing from this definition is the idea of telling people what to do. And that's, if you take a deep look at this definition, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it as we go, the leadership is about influencing people and inspiring people to achieve a goal. And so let's take a look at some of the characteristics of leadership. Now, this isn't an all-inclusive list. This is just a few things that are taken from different leadership theories like servant leadership or authentic leadership, transformational leadership. These are all different characteristics that are covered in Peter Northouse's book, but also several other scholarly articles and texts that talk about leadership. So obviously you want your leader to be a good communicator. The leader's got to be able to tell you what the mission, the vision, what the end result needs to look like. You want them to be honest, obviously. You want them to be even-tempered. How many of you have had a boss or had a supervisor who just lost their temper anytime they got bad news? So a good leader needs to be even-tempered and be able to take bad news and for what it is, find and help inspire solutions to problems. You want them to be creative, be visionary, committed to the goal. One of the things up there is strategic, proactive versus reactive. You want a leader to be able to look ahead and forecast problems and maybe get in front of problems before they start. Proactive versus reactive. The other side of that, though, is you also want a leader who's able to react to things that are unexpected. It's based on imperfect information or incomplete information. And that's another thing we're going to talk about a little bit later as we go on. So those are just some of the characteristics of a good leader. So as John Maxwell says, there's no, if you think you're a leader and you turn around and no one's following you, then you're just taking a walk. But you can't have leadership without followers. So let's take a look at followers for a minute. If leadership is about influence, what is followership? And again, I'm going to ask you to take a second and think about what followership is in the context of our definition of leadership that we talked about a minute ago. We think about followers as people who just do what they're told. I said I've been in the military for a long time. There's orders. We follow orders, right? Well, let's take a look at the definition of followership. A follower is an individual with free will to decide who they wish to follow and which leader they wish to help be successful. Again, the thing that's missing from this is a position and not blind obedience. They have free will. Now, you may be thinking, well, you know, the people who work for me, they don't have free will to decide whether or not they're gonna align themselves with the organization's mission. And maybe that's true to a certain extent, but they do have free will to continue being employed there. have to do, the person, your employee, the members of this organization, they may have to do a minimum amount of work in order to maintain their employment. But again, this isn't about doing what you're told. This is about deciding how best to make the leader in the organization successful. And that's what followership is. So we talked about some characteristics of leadership. Well, let's look at some of the characteristics of followership. You'll see that a lot of these are very, very similar to the characteristics of leadership. You want your followers to be good communicators. You want them to be able to tell you some of the challenges that they're facing, some of the things that that are going well. If things are working well, you don't want to change them. Obviously, you want them to be honest. You want to be proactive, inspirational, creative, team-oriented. There's one on there that I threw in there, challenge the status quo. Now, obviously, sometimes you know, a lot of people get frustrated when they have followers that are always pushing back and always questioning. But you know, that can be a good thing. Sometimes you don't want your followers to just sit at their desk and pound out their widgets and do the same thing day in and day out. You want them to be creative and want them to come to you and say, hey, look, I think I've got an idea that might help make things better, might make things more efficient. And when they do that, you have to support that and encourage it. And you have to do it with the understanding that occasionally there's going to be bad ideas. And occasionally things are going to fail. And that's how we grow, though. And you have to be willing to accept a certain amount of risk when you have followers that challenge the status quo. All right, so let's go on. Communication. So the main relationship that we have between leaders and followers is how we communicate. That relationship is fostered and grown through communication. So let's talk, what is communication? Before we put the definition up, think about what is communication in your own words. All right, let's take a look at this. The exchange of meanings between individuals through a common system of symbols. Now, that's pretty broad and a little bit vague. So what are some of the characteristics of this then? Well, language, obviously, written or spoken, it has to be common. If English is the only language that you speak, and I'm on this web seminar speaking something other than English, then exchange meanings at all, written or spoken. Body language is a huge thing when it comes to communication, especially, maybe not necessarily now. You can't see my body language, and you can't see how my body language might be interpreted differently by from the words that I'm speaking. Huge. Voice tone and emphasis, voice and inflection. Those can be very big too in communicating, not just in the words that are spoken, but in the tone and emphasis that is given to those words. And then combine that with the body language, and it can take on a completely different meaning. For example, my wife, whenever our kids were babies and she was trying to get them to calm down, and sometimes in the middle of the night she would just be at her wit's end, and all she wanted to do was go to sleep, but she knew that if she sounded angry and frustrated, then that certainly wouldn't calm the baby down. So every now and then I'd hear her go, "Oh, shut up, baby. Mommy needs to sleep. Mommy really needs to sleep, and Mommy's really tired." Now, obviously babies don't understand English yet, but they understand tone and inflection. And if she had been yelling or screaming or speaking through gritted teeth, that message may have been received, or probably would have been received by the baby in a different manner. And she was able to get the kids to calm down when that happened. And the final thing that's on the bottom there is exchange. The word exchange, when we're communicating, especially leadership communication, often talks about how we communicate with our teams, with our followers, sometimes even with our leaders. But the word exchange indicates that there's something that comes back to us. It's not one way. So we have to think about this in terms of how the message is being received and what is coming back to us. Consider body language and voice tone and emphasis and inflection when the message is coming back. It's two ways. It's not a single direction. So if you think about communication in an organization, in a traditional organizational structure, here, you see how the mission and vision and goals of the organization flow down from the head of the organization down through the various departments and divisions. This looks a lot like a military unit. I can change the very top of that to brigade commander, and the next two, where department manager says, to regiment, and filter all on down to companies and platoons and fire teams. So this is, business models have traditionally been modeled after military style organizations. And so it's very efficient for information to flow downward to the employee, but it's not very efficient for information to flow back up or laterally. So imagine a lot of us have played that communication game, the communication exercise where the facilitator will tell a story, a very elaborate and detailed story to one person. And that person has to convey as much of that detailed and elaborate story to the next person, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, until it gets all the way to the end. And then the last person has to say everything that was told to them. And it's usually something completely different than what the first person said, or what the facilitator said. So now think about this in terms of the messages that come through this model. The CEO typically will send out an email or something, some kind of maybe a quarterly newsletter or something, where everybody gets the same thing. But if an employee needs to communicate something up the chain of command, up the organizational hierarchy, you have to go through their supervisor, to the branch manager, to the division manager, up to the department head, and to the CEO. And there's a lot of filters there. There's a lot of things that can change along the way. Now think about if the employee needs to speak laterally to someone in a different department. If an employee on the left side of the screen needs to either get information to or get information from an employee on the right side, the hierarchy doesn't allow for them to go laterally. The employee has to go up through the supervisor, branch manager, division manager, department manager, and then across over to the next department manager and on down. It's inefficient. So another way to look at this is how this communication flows one way from the CEO down to the employee. And sometimes that can be very challenging in these hierarchies. So it's a lot of times it's up to the middle managers to find ways to make that efficient and to work out ways for employees to be able to speak laterally as much as they're able to speak vertically. Now, when it comes to communication, there are a lot of things that can get in the way. So our next thing that we're going to discuss is barriers to communication. Things that get in the way of us either delivering or receiving messages. So the first thing is some of these barriers are physical, the environment. Now, I live in Virginia Beach, and I'm about 10 miles from a naval air station, and it's quite possible that an F-18 is going to fly over my house and create a whole bunch of noise and be a barrier to this communication, and you're not going to be able to hear what I'm saying. hopefully, I haven't heard too many jets fly over today, but hopefully that won't happen. Your phone, your email, if you're in your office and you're trying to talk to somebody in your office, the phone ringing or your email notifications, sometimes those can be distractions to how you uh, send and receive messages to the intended person. Biases. We're going to talk a little bit about biases in a bit, but biases are another thing that can get in the way. And most of us don't actively think of ourselves as having biases, but sometimes they're there. Sometimes we don't necessarily think of ourselves as having a gender bias or a cultural bias, but sometimes they creep in when we least expect it. And we'll talk about some of those in just a minute. Preconceptions, those kind of go along with biases a little bit, but sometimes the way we anticipate how someone may or may not react to the things that we tell them, to the messages that we have, that can get in the way of how we deliver our messages. Another thing is preparing for your response. This is a big one, and this is something that you can take to your personal relationships as well as your professional ones. Sometimes, and Stephen Covey says that this is a Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Effective People thing, where people have a tendency to listen to respond instead of listen to understand. If somebody's telling you something, particularly if it's something you don't agree with, you may be trying to formulate your response while the other person is continuing to communicate, and that person doesn't have your complete attention then. So preparing for your response can be a barrier to what that person is trying to tell you. Another thing is language. Obviously, we're all, hopefully on this web seminar, we're all speaking English, but even if English isn't your first language, my accent may be distracting. You may not be able to understand a lot of the things that I'm saying if English isn't your first language because of my accent. And even if English is your first language, regional dialects can get in the way sometimes. Imagine if you grew up in London, you grew up speaking English, and then maybe you're having a conversation with somebody who grew up in New Orleans. You're both speaking English, but the regional dialects can make a big difference in how your message is sent and received. And education is another one. Somebody who is very highly educated and well-read may use words and phrases and vernacular that is not easily understood by someone who doesn't have quite as much education. I think about, if any of you have ever seen the TV show The Big Bang Theory, Dr. Sheldon Cooper talking to their neighbor Penny. Many of the things that he says she doesn't understand simply because she's not nearly as educated as he is. So in this, again, it's not an all-inclusive list. It's just a few examples of things that can get in the way of our communication. So as middle managers, we are both leaders and followers. We have responsibilities to people above us, as well as responsibilities to our team. And so we have to possess and act on the characteristics of both leader and follower. Communication has to flow equally from the leader to the follower and back, both up and down, from you as the manager down to your team, and from you as the manager up to your own bosses, is how communication should flow. And the last bullet on there, communicate with your leader the way you want your followers to communicate with you. I'm going to elaborate on that one a little bit and maybe amend it and say that you need to communicate with your leader the way your leader wants you to communicate with them. How you need to know your leader well enough to know how he or she best receives information. as a leader, I am fairly, I don't want to say I'm hands off, but I trust my team, and I go to them and I'll say, hey, how are we doing on this project? And they'll say, hey, we're doing all right. I think we're on track to finish at this particular time. And then I'll go to my boss and say, hey, boss, everything's good. We're all good. And then he'll start asking questions. Okay, well, where are we with this particular item? Well, I don't know. I'm going to have to go back down and get that information. And so he wants very, very detailed information. So when my team comes to me and says, hey, we're all good, I need to be prepared to ask, hey, okay, well, give me some details on these different aspects of this project so that I can communicate that up my organizational chain. All right, so now we've talked about our roles as managers, our roles as middle managers, different leadership and followership definitions, and some communication things. We're going to take a look, have a little communication exercise. I'm going to read you 2 scenarios, and I want you to think about it for a little bit and see if you can tell me who in these scenarios I am talking about. Who am I talking about? All right, so I'm going to read you this first one. On a cold January day, a 43-year-old man was sworn in as the chief executive of his country. By his side stood his predecessor, a famous general who 15 years earlier had commanded his nation's armed forces in a war that resulted in the defeat of Germany. The young leader was raised in the Roman Catholic faith. He spent the next 5 hours watching parades in his honor and stayed up celebrating until 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, if you've read the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek, you know this one already. So don't start posting stuff on Facebook yet, or posting on the Facebook invite or the YouTube page yet. Just think about this for a minute. Now, most of you are probably thinking that this is pretty obviously John F. Kennedy, right? Cold January day, 43-year-old man, chief executive of his country, predecessor was a famous general, defeat of Germany, Roman Catholic. Yeah, those are all characteristics, and those all describe John F. Kennedy. But there's one very important piece of information missing from this scenario. Let me tell you this. The cold day in January, the year is 1933. Now, does that change your answer? Does that change your perspective? If I told you that the year is 1933. Yes, this scenario is talking about Adolf Hitler. Yes, Adolf Hitler was 43 years old when he was sworn in as the chief of his country. His predecessor was a general that commanded the German army, and it resulted in Germany's defeat. So all of these things, they pointed towards John F. Kennedy. But think about this for a minute. If we were European and we were conducting this web seminar in Europe, because of our knowledge of that nation's history and how we would have been brought up if we were in Europe, would Adolf Hitler been the first answer in our mind, or would John F. Kennedy been the first answer in our mind? Something to think about. Let's take a look at the second one. The second one might be a little bit easier for some of you. A man and his son are in a car accident. The man dies at the scene, and the son is transported to the hospital. The son is immediately taken into surgery. Upon seeing the boy, the surgeon says, "I cannot operate on him. He is my son." Think about that for a minute. The man and his son are in a car accident. The man dies at the scene. The boy is taken to the hospital, and the surgeon says, "I cannot operate on him. He is my son." Now, I'm gonna be honest with you. This one took me a while. I didn't get this one right away. But what if I told you that the surgeon was the boy's mother? Medicine is traditionally a male-dominated field, and so a lot of us were brought up not even, it didn't even cross my mind that the surgeon might have been the boy's mother. And, this is the 21st century. It's very common for that. So what does that say about my biases? So we talked about biases a little bit ago. So I have some bias, some maybe hidden biases that I need to work on in myself and think about. Now, I did this scenario. This scenario was presented in a seminar that a friend of mine and I were attending a while ago. And his thought, this is interesting, his thought was that the surgeon was in fact a man, but they were a homosexual couple that had adopted a child. So I'm not quite sure what that says about him, that he still thought that the surgeon was a man, but was open-minded enough to the realities of the 21st century that this could have been a homosexual couple. I'm not sure what to make of that one. But if you think about these two scenarios in terms of communication, where there is incomplete information, we're going to fill in the gaps. We're going to use our experiences, our education, culture, biases, upbringing, all of those things. We're going to fill in the gaps in order to make a decision. And incomplete information prevents us as leaders from making the best decisions that we can make. We're going to have to make decisions based on incomplete information. That's just the way it is. But when our followers give us the best information that they can give us, and when we give our leaders the best information that we can give them, it helps them, it helps us to make the best decisions. In the first scenario, if I had told you outright that it was 1933, you may not have thought about John F. Kennedy. If I had used a few more gender-specific pronouns in the second scenario, that would have been a no-brainer. So it's important for us to make sure that we're communicating the best, most accurate information that we can provide to our leaders. All right, so the next section that we're going to talk about, again, dealing with communication, we're going to talk about addressing problems. Now, the fact that we're all human beings, we're all fallible, we're going to make mistakes. Our followers and even our leaders are going to stumble. And it's important for us to be able to address problems, address behavioral issues or substandard performance in a very professional way without humiliating or demeaning our employees. So if this is something that you haven't done before, if you work in a small organization that doesn't have a human resources department, or if you are relatively new with this and you don't have the resources for, like, say, a human resources department, the best thing to do is to seek counsel and advice from someone who's experienced in those things. If you have a friend or a colleague or maybe somebody that you go to church with that is in a supervisory position and has had to counsel their employees for substandard performance or behavioral issues, talk to them and see what you can do to best work things out. One of the things that you need to do is make sure you set the proper environment, that you have no distractions. Turn off your phone, turn off your computer screens. When I'm talking to people in my office, I will turn off my computer screens because I get notifications, email notifications that pop up, and I'll even turn off my speakers because I get an audible notification that an email's come in. And I want the person in my office to have my undivided attention. Close the office door so that you can be free from distractions from the outside. Sometimes that can be a little bit dangerous. So you might want to maybe have a third person in the office. But I wouldn't have any more than that, because especially if you're addressing a behavioral or a performance issue, you don't want the person to feel like they're being ganged up on. But if you know your people well enough to know that the conversation can get emotional, you may want to have a third person in there just for everybody's protection. So when you're talking with these with people, and it can be anyone above you or below you, and we're gonna talk about a couple of specific scenarios when addressing problems. We're going to use the SBI model: situation, behavior, and impact. You're going to set the scenario: when and where did this happen? Be as specific as you can, and the behavior that was observed. You give details without judgment. And the impact: what was the impact of their behavior? What did it cause? What was the perception? Okay, make the experience internal to the individual. And these can be used for positive conversations as well, for giving accolades, but they can also, they're primarily used for addressing problems. So let's take a look at a scenario, SBI model. The situation and the behavior, or in the meeting this morning. So you're setting the stage. This is where we are, where we were, and when this happened. Behavior: you were on your phone texting and checking your social media during the meeting. That's probably not very cool. The impact is it gave the impression that you were uninterested in the meeting and was disrespectful to those who were. So you're not making a judgment about the person's character or their intent, but you're talking about the impact of the behavior on the people, on the other people in the room. You're removing emotion, you're removing intent and character from it, and just simply addressing behavior. Here's another one, maybe with a leader. And this is a scenario that I just kind of came up with off the top of my head. In the meeting this morning, when Cindy said she was going rock climbing this weekend, the situation: behavior: you said you were surprised she was able to, since she didn't look like a rock climber. Now that can be a fairly innocent statement. I mean, maybe the boss didn't even think anything of it. The impact was it hurt her feelings because her interpretation of your comment was that you thought she was fat. So sometimes the things that we say, we don't intend for them to come out hurtful, and sometimes they just do. And it goes to intent. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I think I'm going to do something to insult someone today. Or no one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to derail my career. I'm gonna wake up sometime today. I think I'm gonna go get a DUI. No one does that. We have good intentions, and so sometimes we say things without thinking about the impact. And so this is an example of that, and it gives the leader an opportunity to maybe go and apologize and think about what they're saying and how the leader may say it differently next time. So active listening. We talked about this a few minutes ago. We don't listen to respond, we listen to understand. Repeat or paraphrase what the other person says to make sure you heard and understand him or her correctly, even if you don't agree with it. If you don't agree with what the person is saying, that's not the point. The point is for you to understand. Be aware of your body language. Maintain eye contact. Don't roll your eyes or shake your head in disagreement. There are other body language literature and some YouTube videos you can check out about body language. And there are some things that say don't cross your arms because it makes you appear to be closed off. But there's also some other literature that would refute that. Sometimes that's just a comfortable stance for some people. And if your employees or your employer know your personality well enough to know that that's just a comfortable way for you to stand, and it doesn't mean anything that you're closing yourself off to any new ideas or whatever. So that's just, but be aware of your body language and how you are presenting yourself, especially when you're having these difficult conversations. Now, sometimes when we're having these difficult conversations with folks, things can get a little bit emotional. One thing that you need to remember is to address the behavior and not the character or the intent. So let's take a look at a couple of sentences. The first sentence, you are always late, and it shows how irresponsible and inconsiderate you are. There are a couple of things wrong with this. Always, you are always late. Avoid using these terminal phrases like always and never. And the primary reason for that is because if the person is on time just once, it refutes that always claim, and it hurts your own credibility as the counselor, as the mentor, because always isn't true. And it shows how irresponsible and inconsiderate you are. You are an irresponsible person. You are inconsiderate. You're going to the character and the intent of the person rather than addressing the behavior. So let's take a look at the second sentence here. You have been late to work 3 of the last 5 days. It's having a negative impact on our ability to accomplish our organizational mission, and it's frustrating your coworkers because they feel like they have to make up for lost productivity. Now you're talking about the behavior and the impact of the behavior, not just on the organization, but on the person's peers and their coworkers. And maybe you're putting a little bit of peer pressure onto that person, but it's also kind of going towards their sense of loyalty to the organization and their loyalty and commitment to the team. And it's refocusing their behavior onto the organization and the team. And this is something that you can look at for, let's say you have an employee that is turning in work that is not good. There may be grammatical errors or formatting and content errors. So again, you're talking about a negative impact on the organization, and frustrations maybe from you as the supervisor, because you have to do all this rework. You have to reformat and correct the grammar and spelling and the content of the work. Okay, so let's go on. So we're going to continue with de-escalating emotions. If the person becomes angry, which is likely, it can happen, or maybe they're deflecting or they're blaming someone else, or they're blaming you even. The one thing about emotions can be synergistic. And what I mean by that is that we have a tendency to want to match emotion for emotion. So if somebody is getting angry with us, we get angry right back. So maintain your composure, address the issue at hand and the behavior that you're wanting to address. Ensure that the person understands that the behavior you're addressing is unacceptable, or maybe the work. If you're talking about the work content or performance standards, make sure you maintain that focus. Provide options for a way forward, how you're going to help them or what you can do to help that person overcome these challenges, and assure the person that you're committed to helping them. And then end the conversation with a handshake. And that seems kind of trivial, but that physical touch can be a reassuring gesture to show that you're committed to overcoming this obstacle, and that you still respect the person. You respect the person, and that you're committed to changing the behavior into something that is more in alignment with the organizational values and the mission. This one can be a little bit more challenging when you're speaking with your supervisor. Again, if the person becomes angry or defensive, maintain your composure and stick to the issue at hand. Don't match the emotion. Bosses have bad days. They all do. We all have bad days. Sometimes it's We carry in our challenges from home. Somebody cut us off in traffic, got rear-ended on the way into work, maybe got a speeding ticket, and it's just a bad day. And we have that happens, and we carry that into work, and sometimes maybe somebody can get a little bit emotional about that. Ask what you can do to help. Again, this goes back to the definition of followership, where you as the follower are committed to the success of the leader. And when the leader's having a bad day, you're committed to that person's success. You want to help that leader figure out a way to get through whatever it is that they're going through so that they can be committed to the organization. So think about it like this. Maybe your boss, your supervisor is having problems at home. Maybe they're having problems with one of their kids, or maybe some marital issues. You can offer to say, hey, look, let me take these things off of your plate today so that you can go home and work things out with your spouse, or you can go to the school and talk with your child's teacher that's having problems, or something. You are committed to the organization and to the success of the leader. And honestly, if people aren't whole, if they're having problems at home, those problems carry over into the workplace. And the best thing that we can do as both leaders and followers is to help people find ways to be whole at home so that they can be whole at work as well. And again, know when to end the conversation. You're talking with your boss. Keep that in mind. You're talking with your boss. So if it's not going anywhere, you can just end it by saying, look, I'm just concerned, and I'm here if you need anything. Let me know how I can help. I'm gonna go sulk back to my desk now, or however you want to end the conversation. And again, end it with a handshake. Again, that physical touch is reassuring that you respect the person that you're talking with. All right, so I think that just about wraps things up. So some of the things that we talked about, middle managers as both a leader and a follower. We talked about communication up and down the chain as up the chain is as important as communication down. We talked about some ways to have conversations that maintain the dignity and respect of our coworkers, but also to help them grow and work through challenges and problems. So here are some of the resources I used for this web seminar. You can take a look at them, and I don't expect you to write them all down right now. But this web seminar is going to be posted on YouTube permanently, forever and ever and ever, at least as long as YouTube exists. And then so you can go back and take a look at some of these things. Start with Why by Simon Sinek is a very good book. It's an easy read. I recommend it. The Leadership Theory and Practice by Peter Northouse. It's more of a book, but it's got some very good ideas in it and some good things about how to some good characteristics of leaders, and maybe some resources for you as a leader to see what kinds of characteristics you wanted to adopt in your style. Here's my contact information. You can get me on Facebook, LinkedIn. There's my Twitter handle and my email address. And again, if you have any other questions or suggestions for future web seminars, you can post them either to these links, or right on the YouTube video, or even on my Facebook page, or on the events page of this Facebook event. But I want to thank you all for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. For all of you dads out there, have a great Father's Day, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks very much for joining.